Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your current location. I'd like to welcome you to our Mastering TIBCO Scribe webinar series, where today's topic is going to be using TIBCO Scribe with Microsoft Flow and Logic apps. My name is Rich Verdacey, Senior Education Instructor here at TIBCO. Now, before we get started, I would first like to discuss some webinar guidelines. The first being the audio lines of this webinar will be muted. Now, you'll be able to hear us, however, we will not be able to hear you. Any webinar content related question that you may have can be typed into the Q&A widget on your web share screen. Your questions will be addressed at the end of today's webinar. Now, I would ask that you please provide adequate detail in your question regarding the content that had raised it. This will better help us answer your particular question. Now, this webinar will also be recorded, and it's going to be posted within a 48-hour timeline on our website for subsequent reviewing. All attendees today will receive a post-webinar email follow-up providing access to it. Now, on the following two slides, please note our confidentiality statement as well as disclaimer. We're going to pause a few seconds for each so that you have a chance to quickly review it. Okay. Well, once again, thank you for joining us today. Certainly appreciate your time. Joining me today is Ryan O'Connell. Welcome, Ryan, and thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Rich. Happy to be here.
Great. Now, Ryan, would you mind just sharing a little bit with our listeners your role here at TIBCO?
Yeah, so I am one of three product evangelists, platform evangelists here at TIBCO Scribe, and my role is to work with customers and partners and really sort of help drive the sales team here with understanding solutions that we can put together for our customers in the integration space.
Okay, good. Now, could maybe also just talk a little bit about, maybe give an introduction as to what you think is important to cover today with regards to the technology topic that we're going to discuss.
Yeah, so let's go to the agenda. So basically what we're going to cover is just at a high level Microsoft Flow and Logic apps. So, what they are, how, what's their importance, and what's really the difference between the two? I know that a lot of people use the terms interchangeably. They are, Flow works in both, but we'll get into more detail, and I can help you kind of understand a little bit better of what they are if you don't already. And then the other piece of it is how TIBCO Scribe can work with, Flow and Logic apps, and how you can have that synergy between the work you're doing in one to be able to work and execute and coordinate with the things you're doing in TIBCO Scribe as well. And part of that, we'll be discussing the Open API specification, which is part of what really makes that happen, and really kind of helping you understand the pieces involved, whether, starting with creating an event-based map in TIBCO Scribe, and then creating a Flow project and a custom connector, which is actually going to sort of roll that together for you into one. And I'll put this together in the use case demonstration, and you'll see all that. So I think it'll probably make more sense when you can see it when I share my screen in a bit.
Okay, well, great. Based on what I'm seeing here on the agenda, I think this is going to provide, yet another tool in the TIBCO toolbox for those that, not only recognize the importance of data integration, but also, who are responsible for its implementation.
Absolutely, and basically, at the beginning, we're going to basically discuss Flow and Logic apps and really what they are, and I think that's where we kind of go into this next slide, where you can sort of, and I won't read the screen, but basically, they're both Microsoft products, obviously. It's basically a service. Flow is free to basically all end users that have a 365 account. And Microsoft Flow is really intended to be sort of that self-service integration without requiring any of those, custom developer skills or knowing any code. And it's basically building workflows. And you're interfacing with it in a very visual sort of way. And you're basically, positioned to sort of design things around sort of those gap fillers that you need as part of your day-to-day, whether it's creating custom reports or whether it's creating a workflow for updating the Common Data Service or whatever, any number of things. And where that sort of branches out when we talk about logic apps is that you can build a flow without logic apps, and within logic apps you can build flows, and it's really designed for more of the, in this case, more of the enterprise-wide, the system integrator, that developer person who has to sort of manage integrations for the organization. So instead of it being more of the power user individual working with it, it's more of this person is using logic apps to develop an integration solution for the entire enterprise. And that may mean expanding and customizing it in Visual Studio and expanding on some of the features there. So it's really more of the enterprise developer tool versus Flow by itself is sort of that power user, that analyst to be able to use it as that sort of enablement tool in their day-to-day workflow.
Well, you know, when I first looked at this, Ryan, I felt that there was a bit of overlap across these two products with regards to functionality. I mean, is that fair to say?
It is, and I think, and let me just kind of talk a little bit about that overlap and sort of the synergy between the two. But basically, the overlap is that Flow is a component that can be used in both tools. So it's I can build a flow in Logic Apps. I can also build a flow, for just myself and my team. And but if I really want it to expand and be on a schedule, in addition to some of the triggering mechanisms I can use, that's where Logic Apps comes into play, where I can do a lot more development on top of that and do some more integral things that may be more dependent on other applications and other systems and may not all require integration. So they're two different tools. One is just a kind of a handy back pocket, sort of a multi-tool, and the other one is a little more dynamic and has a lot more reach.
Got it. Well, thank you very much for that, Ryan.
So I put us on the product synergy slide, and what I wanted to do is sort of get into what allows us, what positions us to be able to work so seamlessly with Flow, whether you're using it in Logic Apps or using it as sort of the individual building something for you and your team, is that we're taking advantage of the Open API specification. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a community-driven publication of really sort of a standard language. It's agnostic of different interfaces. It can be used and built into any number of applications or tool sets. And it's something that is for REST APIs primarily. And what we're doing is we're allowing people to basically work within our platform and be able to take advantage of the fact that we have implemented the OAS specification. So now people can easily discover and understand the functionality by maybe they want to use a Swagger specification. That's how it was previously known. And it's, like I mentioned before, it's that blueprint for working with REST APIs. And it's something that we have taken a lot of pride in implementing that as part of the TIBCO Scribe solution. So you can take advantage of those features, whether it's, and again, I won't read them all to you here, but basically take advantage of the endpoint URL that we automatically generate for you. And I'll demonstrate that for you in a few minutes. And be able to do put or post or delete commands, pass parameters, request and response for schema information. So there's really a whole lot that you can do with this. And we're just going to touch on one feature in this demonstration, but really the scope and the scale of this is really dependent upon your imagination. And we really talk about it as being important because it's one of those gap fillers. It's bridging the gap between I've got an application over here that I don't necessarily have a named connector for, but because I can take advantage of TIBCO Scribe's event-based functionality, well, they're going to automatically generate for me an endpoint URL that I can use and embed into a workflow or embed into my application, and I'm going to be able to take advantage of that feature and be able to create event-based triggers and perform integrations in that particular manner. And it just simplifies and streamlines the entire process for you.
So, Ryan, just to be clear, now because Flow, Logic Apps, and TIBCO all support this OAS specification, we're able to, together, really, to bridge disparate applications and databases so as to provide data at its point of need. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. So it's really being able to customize that integration flow, no pun intended. So it's your way of doing just what you described.
Okay, great. All right.
So again, kind of putting a little more color around the product synergy, and there's a nice diagram here on this slide to really kind of simplify the thought process here, because I'm sure a lot of you on the call are not developers. You're maybe an analyst, you're probably an administrator, some of you are consultants. There's a whole variety of skill sets on the call. So some of you, I understand all this, Ryan, no big deal. Others are, well, I work with Flow and it's easy to use. I also work with TIBCO Scribe, and that's even easier to use. But you're talking about OAS, you're talking about these new specifications, you're talking about event-based. So let me just kind of give you some more description around it, some visual here, and then my demonstration hopefully will provide sort of the complete picture. But when you're implementing the scenario that we're talking about here, where I want to be able to take advantage of TIBCO Scribe's event-based integration maps, the first thing I need to do is I need to create an event map. So I'll walk you through that shortly here, but it's basically just that process of dragging and dropping and building that integration map in an event-based solution allows me, or actually what Scribe does for you, is it will automatically generate that endpoint URL. And that URL is self-contained in the sense that it's, because we're taking advantage of the Open API specification, that when you drop that into something like a Postman or you use that in any one of your applications, you can make that call. And all of that metadata will come back that's been assigned in that map. And again, I'll demonstrate that for you here in a moment. And it's really going to simplify, and it's really sort of a, I want to say a auto magic kind of a thing. So it's a very surprisingly simple thing to do. So step one, just create that event map. Step two, and some of you have already worked in Flow and Logic Apps, you just want to create a project. You want to be able to start your flow, whether you base it on updates you're making to the CDS or whether it's updates you're making in CRM, and really define how you want that outbound trigger to take place. And then you're taking advantage of a custom connector that I'm going to show you how to do. In the space of this call, you will be able to see start to finish the creation of a custom connector in Flow that you'll be able to use with your event-based maps. And then you just want to create your flow around that. So what you want that connector to connect to, what do you want, what data do you want it to pass back to Scribe to create or trigger that event-based map. And you can see down here at the bottom, it's really starting with, in Flow, is creating the trigger, defining what that action is going to be once that trigger's been switched, so to speak, and then seeing that output. And that JSON payload based on the custom connector you're creating, and again, I'll demonstrate this, and I promise you it's very easy to do, that we're going to pass those values via that JSON call to TIBCO Scribe's platform, and we're going to input that. We're going to take those values. We're going to bring in whatever those values are, whether they're string or whether they're numeric, whatever that data is that we've defined. We're going to process that via the event map, and then we'll produce an output. So it's going to be that response to that message. So it'll tell us how that successfully or not successfully completed that integration. So it's a little wonky when you talk about it, but again, when I demonstrate it for you, I think it'll make more sense.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Ryan, this whole notion about event maps versus a map that you would run on some sort of set frequency or on demand, there's a lot of benefit in that, obviously, because it's almost real time when the transaction occurs and then the consumption and integration into the target system happens. That's value add. And I think another point, if I could add, is some of these applications out there, these cloud-based applications, throttle their API, and as opposed to you going in there and hitting their API and trying to get to that data that you want, set up this trigger mechanism like you're talking about, and have that application will push out the data, right? And then we can subsequently pick it up and move it into the target. So there's certainly a lot of benefit.
Well, there is, and when you're processing thousands of records a day, not every record is to be, not all records are treated equally. Some data is important, but it's important at the end of the month. And some data is important at the moment it gets entered. So to be able to have an integration platform that can address real-time events, well, that's going to be important when you've got 1,000 records, but one of those records is a priority, and you want it to be integrated immediately. You don't want it to wait till the end of the day. You don't want it to wait till the end of the hour. You want it to be integrated immediately based on the workflow and the downstream operations you have associated with it, whether it's a new product being added or a new sales come in or whatever that may be based on your business. That's a very important thing to have in your back pocket, to know that when you've defined a priority record, that you now have a mechanism for integrating that into the appropriate systems, so that way you're able to take advantage of that.
Well, it seems pretty straightforward, Ryan. You think we can take a look at the slides?
Yes. Yeah, I'm hoping that if I've confused anybody with some of these slides and these descriptions, for those of you who don't really consider yourselves technical, I'm hoping that my example sort of spells it out for you visually. So the use case that I want to kind of talk through with you for a second before I start the demonstration is that what we find hearing from customers and partners is that not many companies are using Flow at the enterprise level with Logic Apps. Some are, some are not. But what we are finding quite a bit of, what we're hearing on a regular basis, is that individuals and power users are using Flow to address their immediate needs. So some customers, they have department-level operations that they want to take care of, so they're building flows to pull data in from mailboxes or CRM, so that way they can update a custom entity in the common data service so they can run special reports for their boss. So kind of think about it in that term. So like we talked about before, thousands and thousands of records are being updated in your CRM system. So what if I only care about one of them? We mentioned earlier the priority. So what about contacts? So if I'm working in the finance department, my boss says I want a very compact list of priority contacts that get added, but I want that list on a daily basis. I don't want that list at the end of the week or end of the month. I want to be able to get that on a daily basis so I can roll that up to my boss and show that we're on top of our business here, that we're keeping track. Every time somebody in sales puts somebody in the system as a priority, I've got that list. I know exactly who they are, and I can start catering to them as needed. But then typically what happens, and I know this from experience, and some of you out there probably know it as well, is that once your boss starts bragging about this report that they have to his peers or her peers, eventually they start asking for the same report. And then mysteriously, your little Flow project that you built for a very simple request from your boss now is being asked to be added to the enterprise TIBCO Scribe integrations to the data warehouse. So now you're in a situation where, okay, now I need to have two completely different systems talk to each other. And I'm just the analyst. I'm just the power user. I'm not an IT person. I'm not an integrator. How can I bridge the gap between these two systems, keep it in real time, and still be able to focus on those priority records and do it without having to write any code? And that's sort of our example here, is how can I go from my individual, small, department-level type use of Flow to now expand that into my enterprise without having to do any heavy lifting. So that's sort of the framework around the demonstration. So let me get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview. I know most of you already know TIBCO Scribe. I'm just going to quickly do a high level of an event-based solution and an event-based map, so that way you can sort of get a feel for what that is like, and then I'll move that into the Flow portion of the demonstration. So this is Scribe, TIBCO Scribe Online. We're part of their cloud platform. This is an iPaaS integration platform as a service. This is something that's in the cloud. We're able to address on-premise and cloud-based data sources. So a lot of you on the call have hybrid environments. We're very capable of addressing that. And here is basically what you're going to see if you've got a Scribe org, is this dashboard. And in here, very easily, we have the ability to create solutions. You'll notice that I have an option to create an event-based solution, which is important because I can't create an event-based map unless I've got an event-based solution. Very easy to do. You just simply click OK on that. And I'm just going to go into the event-based solution I've already created. And you can see here the status is waiting for an event. So it's literally waiting for that JSON call from whatever application is going to be sending me data. And in here, I've got a very basic map. And within this event solution, I've got an event map here. And I've got my connections. I'm connecting to a dynamic CRM environment as well as a MariaDB that's located on my laptop. And all I've done here, and again, most of you are already familiar with Scribe, but basically what I've done is I've just dragged and dropped these control blocks over here onto my canvas, my configuration canvas here, where I dragged over a wait for response. And as we talked about, I'm waiting for that data to be sent to me from whatever system is taking advantage of this event-based integration map. And I'm requesting very specific information. I can add more fields if I want. I can define whether it's a string or whether it's numeric, whatever I want to put in here, I can change that. I can also identify whether it's date time, whether it's a GUID. So I can pass the data. I can kind of define what I want this specification to share with the system that's going to be taking advantage of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete this line. I don't want that to go in here. So now it's these values that are coming in from that system. In this case, it's going to be flow. I'm building a fetch block that says, hey, wait a minute, let me go pull all the values I want. Maybe I'm only bringing back a portion of the information, so why don't I use my connectivity with TIBCO Scribe, connect to my CRM environment, connect to the entity within CRM, filter down to the components that I care about. And you'll notice here where the priority is set to true. So I'm being very specific. I'm not getting every contact. I'm only getting the ones that the user identified as being a priority. And then I'm just dragging over my database block here to do an update or an insert. Doing the same thing. I can see all the fields that are available, all the tables. In this case, I've only got one table. I set my matching criteria so I don't get duplication. So if I happen to update a record that's already in the system, it will not duplicate it. It will look for a change in the record. If there's a change, it will update it. But if it doesn't see the record, if it can't find that identification ID that's coming from Dynamics, well, then it's going to make a new record. It's going to then assume this is a net new, and it will insert that record in there. And then I can map the field. And I'm moving kind of quickly through this, but it's very easy to kind of go through, and I can simply drag and drop the objects over that I want to be able to have them map between System A and System B. And again, this is all happening automatically in the background. So once I've built this, it sits there and waits for that call. So where the information that comes in, I can use that to look for other data, and I can use this whole process to update a system that I may not even have access to as the super user. I was just told to work with the IT department or the integration team and have my custom data that I'm putting into my common data service go to the enterprise data warehouse, so that way other VPs can get that data. So that's what you're looking at here. You're looking at all the dragging and dropping, adding field A to field B, so that way when this job runs, it will pull that data in, it will write that to the database, and then I can even send a response back that says, hey, this is the status, this is what happened. I successfully passed that value over. In fact, I can even return values. So if I want to write this out to an email or something, I can have it respond, so I can have an email come into my inbox and say, hey, this job was successful. So a lot of flexibility here, and again, you're really only limited by your imagination because this can scale to dozens of endpoints and really address all of your integration needs just with one trigger coming from Flow here. So let's sort of dive into Flow real quick. So that's at a high level an event-based map. It's a map with no schedule. You'll notice there is no scheduling function here. It's literally waiting for a request. So it is going to sit here and wait. So now let's go into Flow for a second. So I have just a basic Flow project. This is the free version. and I'm going to walk you through this because it's probably the most common for all of you. If all of you went to your SharePoint site or bounced around in your Office 365 login, you'll probably see the flow icon. So for a lot of you, this is the experience. It's coming in, it's clicking on My Flows, putting something together. And what I've sort of put for the demonstration here is, this is my flow. And what I've got here is a situation where anytime a record is updated in my Dynamics environment, it's going to create a record in my Common Data Service, and then it's going to trigger this integration job, which is actually a custom connector to call back to Scribe Online to trigger an event. It's going to pass the contact ID, and it's going to pass the full name of that person. So this is going to actually, Scribe's going to use this information to cross-reference it against the CRM system at large, confirm the proper person is a priority, make all of those logical decisions, pass that data to the data warehouse, and then respond back with some information. So here, I can add one more function to this. I can say, all right, well, that's great. Now I want to be able to create the, let me close this here so I have more room. Now I want to be able to just add an email connection to this whole thing. And it's really simple. I'm going to do a Gmail account, something very basic. I'm really not going to finish this. I'm just going to show you what you can do. And here's a case where now, because I'm using this open API with my TIBCO Scribe account, I can very easily just click into these fields. These are all the values that I showed you a moment ago that were inside here. So here's my endpoint URL that tells me that this is the map I want to execute. These are the two fields. But remember, I said I want to bring data back. So I'm actually going to be bringing back all of this information, the name of the person, all of that to confirm that this job is run successfully. So I can literally pick from that list. So if I want to send an email, I can say, okay, well, this is the person that was added. And then here are the results of that. So I can just put that in there. Very easy, nothing too complicated. And I can just save that, make a basic little update to my map. But before I trigger the map to kick off, you want to take a look at what the whole effort is around creating a custom connector. Now, some of you, again, you're hanging in there. I appreciate it. To build a custom connector in Flow, because we have used the Open API specification, I can come in here, and I showed you this before. I got this endpoint URL, which is automatically generated by Scribe. You don't have to build this. The minute you drag over these blocks and click Apply, you'll get this URL. And that URL allows you to be able to come in here and build custom connections. And it's a very simple process. I can say I'm going to create a new custom connection. I'm going to import from Open API URL. I'm going to call this demo because I'm boring. I'm going to paste in that URL. I'm going to make one minor modification. I'm just going to add a /API-docs. Eventually that will be built in, as I was promised 3 years ago. So this is going to now make that call. Now I can put a little picture in here. It says, hey, I know exactly where it's coming. It's coming from Scribe. I'm going to go into my definition here. It says it's a post request. I'm going to put update. I'm going to come down here, and here they are. Here are those values. So you can see all I did was put in the URL, and you can see that it wants my CRM ID, the full name. Very, very simple to do. So I can now, if I want, in fact I will, I'll put in that access token, which is part of the URL. I'm going to click back. I'm going to click Create. And it's basically going to create a connector that I can drag into. Close this. There's my connector. So if I want to create a new flow map with this, that's all I have to do. In fact, I'll come in here, edit one more time, and show you this before I trigger it. a new step. I called it demo. I'm moving faster than my network is allowing me to. We'll have to go back and look at it from Power Apps. But so basically, that's the entire process of creating a connector. So here's my connector. It's available. I can share it if I want. But that's all it is. That was the full extent of creating a connector in here. And this is the one I created earlier. So it's a simple case of creating it with that URL. All of those values that you assigned in that request block are all going to be visible through that URL. So now, when I go into my Dynamics environment, and I come into my contacts entity, and I'm looking for a contact that is not a priority. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click on this person. You saw my flow map. I set it up to say anybody that's been updated. I'm going to change that priority to yes. And now I'm going to click Save down here at the bottom. So now I've just triggered that event. So now, as part of my day-to-day, my job was to set up a flow to update the Common Data Service. So that way, anytime a contact either came in as net new priority or was updated to priority, I need to be able to create a custom list and make that available on a daily basis to my boss. So now I can take a look and we can see how that job did. It's going to take a minute or so to freshen up. But basically, once this executes, it's going to go through the process. It's going to look to see that the update was made to the CDS. Using our TIBCO Scribe connector, we're going to pick up those values out of the Common Data Service, send that information to Scribe. That's then going to execute the map. And then it's going to pass back those values to say, hey, this was successfully or not successfully integrated, and you can get your status from that. So taking its sweet time here.
So that URL that you had mentioned before for the event map, that is unique for that event map, is that correct?
That's a good question. So, right. So that URL is useless for anyone else. So that URL will be specific to my organization. It'll be specific to that event-based solution, the event-based map, and it will pass only those values I was looking for. So here, we'll trigger another one to see if maybe we're having some problems here. Let's switch that to true. So that way, you know, that URL is really not going to be able to be abused by somebody else. Somebody else takes that and drops it in there. They need to know what the values they need to send. They also need to have the security access back to that organization. So it's really very targeted, and it is very secure. We're giving this one more time. It looks like it doesn't want to play ball. But
I think it's pretty obvious as to what you're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of parts and pieces that make this up, but I think what's good here is you're really seeing how this comes together, and you know, the functionality behind the scenes that's going to transpire based on events that occur within an application.
Exactly. Just like that flow diagram that was in the slide. It's really just sort of piecing together the logical steps that you want, identifying the information that you want to have integrated, and then having that integration map with the endpoint URL, dropping that into a custom connector, which we built in just a matter of seconds, yep. And then using that connector inside your flow project, you're then able to sort of weave together this integration and be able to, as these events happen, trigger a full enterprise-wide integration job at the same time.
Sure. Okay.
So.
Well, great. Well, thanks for that, Ryan. You know, it's always, like I said before, it's always good to see the pieces and parts firsthand to really get a good understanding as to how all this comes together from a configuration perspective as well as an operation. Bring this webinar to a conclusion. So on behalf of TIBCO, Ryan O'Connell, myself, Richard Acey, we thank you all for taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. Don't forget to join us once again for our next webinar session in the TIBCO Mastering TIBCO Scribe series, where you can find the latest and greatest on our website. So thank you all, and again, have yourself a great rest of your day.